You
don't want to have anybody left out in the cold.
Right. So good afternoon, bonsoir, evening. Let's see who else is here. What other times of day do we have here? Good, very early morning.
All right, I'm going to mute everyone, and Taan Ajaan Geoff, unmute.
Okay. We've got a few more minutes.
Yeah, before I start, we got a few more minutes before I start the live stream also. So I just prepped it up. So when you start, we'll start the recording.
Okay, fine.
Taan Ajaan, do you have any monastery stories? Everybody
Monasteries.
good? Is everybody good?
Well, we had a disrobing, which was sad.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, it was during the last few weeks?
Yes, Tandan disrobed.
Really?
Yeah. The community is still kind of rearranging itself now around that.
Yeah.
Okay.
But a good monastery story is we're sitting and meditating. We have a new dining hall down at the bottom of the hill with a big deck. And some evenings when it's really hot, that's the best place to sit and meditate. And so one of the women at the monastery was sitting meditating there. She felt something coming up next to her leg. And she reached down and touched it. It was soft, but it didn't seem furry. So she just sort of sat there. And it turned out when at the end of the meditation, she looked down, it was this little tiny rattlesnake coiled up.
No.
And so fortunately, the rattlesnake was just perfectly content to be where it was. It didn't want to bother anybody. So yeah,
Okay.
monastery stories.
Can people stay at the monastery now again?
We've had just a few coming in at a time. With people who come in early, we ask them to quarantine themselves for a week first while they're here. In other words, they'll stay out in a tent, and they won't be working in the kitchen, but otherwise they'll be working around.
So we would have to camp for a week before going into the guest house?
Right, right.
Oh.
All right, Taan Ajaan, I think we can start the recording now. And you can start whenever you can after that.
Okay, let's sit. Let's meditate briefly. Or I'll meditate briefly with you, and then you continue meditating while I talk, okay? So, get comfortably in position. And think thoughts of goodwill. Goodwill is a wish for true happiness, as we said. And spread it around. Because true happiness comes from within. There's no conflict between your true happiness and anyone else's. So when you wish goodwill for yourself, extend goodwill to yourself, it's not a selfish thought. But it's the main motivation for the practice. Same as when you have goodwill for others, you remind yourself that you're looking for happiness that is going to be harmful to no one. So you want to develop your own internal resources as a way of finding that happiness. So tell yourself, may I be truly happy? May I understand the causes of true happiness and be willing and able to act on them. And then extend the same thought to others, starting with people who are close to your heart, then moving out and ever widening circles. And then bring your attention to the breath. It's good to start with some good long, deep in and out breaths to emphasize the feeling of breathing in the body. Find your spot where it's clearest. Then ask yourself if long breathing is comfortable. Start adjusting things. So you find a breath that's not too long, not too short, not too heavy, not too light. When it feels just right for the needs of the body and the needs of the mind right now. Of course, those needs may change. So stay on top of what the body needs and stay on top of what your mind needs right now. And then as the breath gets comfortable, we start surveying through the body. See what feels best for you. Starting down at the navel, moving up the front of the torso, through the head, down the shoulders and the arms, down the back, out the legs. Go at your own pace. Then when you're ready, you can settle down and just be at one spot. Think of your awareness spreading from that spot to fill the whole body. Like the light of a candle in an otherwise dark room. The flame of the candle is in one spot, but its light fills the entire room. And try to maintain that centered but enlarged awareness as best you can. If it begins to blur out, go back to the survey of the body, section by section. But otherwise, learn how to stay right there, clear, centered. And then you meditate while I talk. This afternoon, we'll talk about how to approach the issue of death from the perspective of the Buddha's awakening. Remember that you had three knowledges. The first, that death is followed by rebirth. And then we go through many levels of being, or it's possible to go through many levels of being. The second knowledge, you saw that what determines those levels of being is our karmic record, the actions we've done, both in the past and in the present moment. This first interest was in the present moment at death, the choices that the mind makes, whether it has right view or wrong view at that moment. But that led him in the third knowledge to look more carefully at his mind in the present moment, to see what actions were leading to death, aging, birth, becoming, clinging, craving, just going down the list. Look at them simply as actions without paying attention to who was doing the action. Just the principle of action in and of itself. And discover that that was the way to avoid the issue of this dilemma that's created by the fact that both craving for becoming and craving for non-becoming can lead simply to more becoming. Which through seeing those actions and learning how to develop dispassion for them. That was what led to his experience of the deafness. Now, the lessons we can learn from that have to do both with preparing for a good rebirth, if we can't totally reach the deathless, but also learning what we can do as we meditate to learn the skills that would be necessary for finding that deathless element. The Buddha recommends mindfulness of death as a meditation practice. In fact, that's the context in which he talks about being in the present moment or focusing on the present moment. Present moment is not a good in and of itself, but it's the place where the work has to be done. And so when he's talking about recollection of death, you're not thinking simply death, 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 death. You're thinking, okay, given the fact that death could come at any time, and that the state of my mind at death, and also the karmic record that I've developed up to that point, will have a huge impact on where I'm going to go. There's work I've got to do. And the work you can do, falls into two main categories. One is simply the things you can do in order to create good options for rebirth in case you need them for the moment of death. And the other is mastering the skills in the present moment. So you understand, what are these actions that lead to becoming, that lead to craving? And how can I learn how to deal with them more skillfully so that I don't have to slip off into an unskillful birth at that time? So in terms of the first category, creating good karma in advance to create good options, the most basic list that the Buddha gives for the things you have to do is to develop conviction, virtue, generosity, and discernment. Now, conviction we've already talked about. It's basically conviction in the Buddha's awakening, that what he learned in the night of his awakening really is a good guide to how we should look at our lives. I was talking with a Zen teacher one time and saying, "You're Theravadas, you have faith in your practice, right?" He said, "Yes." "Well, what do you have faith in? Anything more specific than just faith in the Dharma?" I said, "Yes, we have faith in the Buddha's awakening. This, for us, is the central event around which we shape our lives." Then based on that, there's a quality of virtue, and our virtue is observing the precepts. The precept against killing, stealing, illicit sex, lying, and taking intoxicants. That third quality, generosity. When the Buddha was asked, where should a gift be given? He says, where you feel inspired. And generosity is our first taste of free will. We do have choices. We have things that we could keep for ourselves. But we decide that, no, we'd rather share them with someone else. You realize that you're not a slave to your cravings. You can step back from your cravings and think about long-term consequences and gradations of pleasure. There's the pleasure of consuming something, but there's also a greater pleasure that comes as you learn how to share what you have in excess. And then finally, with discernment, it's defined as discernment of arising and passing away that is penetrated. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about the fact that even though these are said to be qualities that are there to prepare you for good options when the option of rebirth comes, they also shade into the training of the mind. Conviction, of course, points you where. If you have conviction in the Buddhist awakening, the main lesson he learned, of course, was the Four Noble Truths. Suffering comes from within, comes from our actions, comes from our clinging and craving. So if you truly have conviction in the Buddha's awakening, you're going to start looking inside, observing your mind. Similarly with virtue. When you take on the precepts, the precept is that you are not going to intentionally do any of those things. You cannot break a precept unintentionally. In other words, if you happen to step on a bug, not knowing that it's there. Or if you say something that you think is true, but it turns out that it's not true, neither of those actions will break a precept. So as you take on the precepts, you focus more and more attention on your intentions. At the same time, you have to develop qualities of mindfulness, alertness, ardency. Mindfulness to keep the precept in mind. Alertness to watch what you're doing as you're doing it. And then ardency is to stick with it. And even there will be cases where you will have to make sacrifices in order to maintain your precepts, but you're willing to put out the effort. There's three qualities: ardency, alertness, and mindfulness are qualities that are developed in mindfulness practice and concentration practice. So you're preparing yourself to meditate as you take on the precepts. With generosity, the Buddha focuses on how the rewards of generosity are not just a matter of the gift you give or to whom you give it, but a lot of it has to do with the motivation with which you give. There's one passage where he talks about the different kinds of motivation you might have. And in the very first one, it sounds like he's starting out with a catch-22. He's recommending that one of the rewards of generosity is that you would be reborn in a good place. But he says one of the lowest motivations for generosity is that I will enjoy this after death. In other words, I'm going to get this back with interest. He doesn't say it's a bad motivation. He talks about the different levels of devas and how different motivations correspond to different levels of deva lands that you might go to after death. This would be the four great kings, which is not a bad place to be. But he says there are higher motivations, and he encourages them. The next higher one is simply that giving is good. It's a good thing to be generous. Higher than that is that you have a family custom of being generous, and you will maintain your family custom out of respect for your parents and your ancestors. And even higher motivation is seeing that there are people who are not well off, whereas you are well off. It's not right that you don't share. Sense of obligation when you have something that other people don't. And higher motivation, which is that there have been great gift-giving sacrifices in the past, and you can give in that same way. A higher motivation still is that it simply makes the mind serene when you're generous. There's a sense of gratification and joy arise. Then finally, higher than that is the sense of this an ornament of the mind. At that point, you don't need them anything anymore from the generosity. But it's just a good thing to have. So here again, the practice of generosity makes you more and more sensitive to what's going on in you. In each of these cases, you're basically talking to yourself about why you're giving. And the Buddha is encouraging you to have some more sensitivity to different motivations that you might have for being generous. As for discernment, it says penetrative knowledge of arising and passing away. It's not simply watching things coming and going. To be penetrative, the knowledge has to, one, see what is the origination of these things that are coming and going in the mind. These whatever it is that I'm experiencing. And origination basically means causation. And when the Buddha uses the word origination, 9 times out of 10, it's origination coming from within. The causes are things that are coming from your own mind. Then beyond that, to be penetrative, your discernment has to see which things that are arising should be encouraged to stay and which should not be encouraged to stay. So you're getting more and more sensitive to what's going on in the mind and the effect that certain mind states will have. Learning, encouraging yourself to develop skillful mind states and to get rid of unskillful mind states. So even though this would be classified as one of the practices for preparing yourself for a good rebirth in the future, it's also pointing you more and more to your mind in the present moment. This way it gives you practice in getting ready to meditate. Now, in addition to those 4 qualities, conviction, virtue, generosity, and discernment, there are other lists. There's a passage where they talk about the qualities that would make you a deva, and that list has those 4 qualities plus learning. Here would be learning of the Dharma. Now, back in those days, when you learned the Dharma, it simply wasn't a matter of reading, but you would find good passages that you found inspiring. You would memorize them. And this is a practice I would encourage, because you think about what's sloshing around in your mind as a result of having been exposed to TV and the internet. One of the monks here at the monastery tells a story about when he was an exchange student down in Mexico. And they had a big party for the visiting gringos. And the Mexican students would sing folk songs. And then they turned to the Americans and said, okay, could you sing us some American folk songs? And the American students looked at one another and they didn't know any folk songs. So they ended up singing Gilligan's Island and other commercial jingles. So if that's the kind of stuff you have in your mind, it might be good to replace it with some good Pali passages or Pali passages translated into English. You just learn to memorize them running over your mind. So these things are with you when you need them. I know in my own case, after Ajaan Fuang passed away, that first year at the monastery was a difficult year because we had people coming in from outside trying to take over the monastery. And it created a lot of difficulties. And time and again, I would be thinking about, well, what would Ajaan Fuang do to handle this case? And his words would come right back to me. One time he said this, another time he said that. And that was what kept me going well. was having that in my mind. It's one of the reasons why I wrote the book Awareness Itself, was to keep those things in mind and to share them with other people. So it's good to have good short Dharma passages that you can hold in mind. That's a way of giving you strength and giving you guidance when you need it. Another one of the practices that leads to good rebirth is the practice of the Brahma Viharas. Goodwill for all beings, compassion for all beings, empathetic joy for all beings, and equanimity with regard to all beings. And the Buddha says, if you make a constant practice of this, it can have a very high impact on your opportunities to be reborn in the Brahma world. For either 1, 2, 4, even 500 aeons, he says. So that's another way that you can prepare for good options that will be available to you at the moment of death if you develop these skills in advance. Now, yes, you're developing these skills. Remember, as I said earlier, this is going to require a certain amount of effort, this practice, a certain amount of dedication. And you'll have to be developing a skillful sense of self around these. So don't be afraid of that sense of self. I don't know how many times I've heard people say, well, if you do concentration practice, it requires a lot of effort, and effort requires a sense of self. And we all know sense of self is a bad thing. Well, if the sense of self is developed around comparing yourself with other people, yes, that is unskillful. But the sense of self that says, okay, I'm capable of doing this, I will benefit from it. I am the responsible one who's going to be responsible for my birth or how I handle aging and listen to that. That sense of self is going to be necessary. So don't be afraid of developing that. As long as you're not on the verge of arahantship, you need a sense of self to motivate yourself to act. So those are some things you can do as preliminaries to prepare good options to be available for you at the moment of death. The other things you do is you focus in on the present moment in your meditation. Again, you're here, as the Buddha says, because there's work to be done. And particularly you want to learn about the steps that are going to be leading to craving, because remember that image the Buddha had. Rebirth is like a fire being blown from one building to another building. And in those days, they believed that the fire had to feed on something in order to burn. In this case, it would feed on the wind, carrying it from one building to another. We know how winds can be, and we know how fires can be in winds. They can spread in all directions, and they're pretty blind. So you want to be able to learn how to gain some control over your cravings. This is the big focus of learning to meditate in the present moment, is getting some control over your cravings. We'll notice, I'm just noticing in passing, that when the Buddha focuses on meditation, when you study, he actually focuses your attention on two of the main factors in the sequence that lead up to craving, independent arising. One is feeling, how feeling leads to craving. And the other is fabrication. Remember, fabrication is the first factor that occurs in the list after ignorance. So for example, when you're developing concentration, you've got the three types of fabrication. You've got the in and out breath as your object. That's bodily fabrication. Directed thought and evaluation is you talk to yourself about the breath, adjust the breath. And then mental fabrication, which will be feelings and perceptions, the feeling of ease that you're trying to create as you focus on the breath, and the perceptions of the mental images that you hold in mind to keep you there. And these are the things that need to be put together in order to get the mind in concentration. And as you work with these things, you'll find that you get hands-on experience with these different kinds of fabrications, so that instead of doing them in ignorance, you'll be doing them in knowledge. And that turns them from a cause of suffering into part of the path. Similarly with feeling. Feeling is one of those fabrications. It can lead to craving, but if you look at your feelings and learn how to analyze them the same we talked about this morning, so that you get some distance from them and not feel so totally overwhelmed by them, then you're not so likely to be jumping for whatever craving comes your way. So this is the main focus in the present moment in the practice, is focusing on these factors of independent co-arising. Actually, whichever factor you find most congenial to focus on. Some people find name and form, other people find different factors to be good. But in every case, in independent co-arising, it's things that are happening in the present moment. And you're trying to understand cause and effect. So you focus your attention on the present moment. You focus on these things as they're happening in and of themselves. Think of the Buddhist formula for mindfulness. You're focusing on the body in and of itself, putting ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress in reference to the world, or you're focusing on feelings or mind states. In each case, you're looking at these things in and of themselves, actions in the present moment. And you're not concerned about what you want in the world outside. Remember, your sense of the world outside is part of becoming. And as you're being pushed out of one becoming, you don't want to say, well, I just want to go to another becoming, whatever shows up. So you have to learn how to focus on this frame of reference, which is the thing in and of itself, the experience in and of itself, without reference to the world outside. And we're doing this because, as the Buddha said, we have to deal with dangers that are coming up. And this is one of the aspects of mindfulness practice that is often underplayed. They talk about mindfulness being accepting and open, but the Buddha often talks about, okay, there has to be a sense of urgency as you develop your mindfulness, as it develops into concentration, because there are dangers all around. You think of the image of the quail that's caught by the hook because it wandered in the wrong territory, or the monkey that's been caught because it wandered into the wrong territory, got caught in a monkey trap. There's the image of the gatekeeper at the fortress, who has to make sure that no enemies come in. In other words, no unskillful states come in. There's the image of your head being on fire, and you have to be very mindful to put the fire out. So again and again, when the Buddha is talking about mindfulness, there are images that give rise to a sense of urgency, and you're counteracting dangers. When you apply this to breath meditation, this is one of the types of meditation which gives a lot of emphasis on fabrication. You think about the first tetrad in breath meditation instructions, the Buddha talks about calming bodily fabrication. Now, bodily fabrication here means your in and out breath. And you might ask, well, why is he talking about it in such technical terms? Why can't he just say, calm the breath? He's trying to get you to see the role of fabrication, the role of your intentions in the way you breathe. Similarly, in the second tetrad, when he talks about being sensitive to mental fabrication and calming mental fabrication, he wants you to see these processes of fabrication and to learn how to manipulate them. It's in manipulating them that you get awareness and knowledge of them. And I've talked to some people who say, well, if you're working on the breath, what are you going to do when you die? You won't be able to be with your breath anymore. Well, in working on the breath, you're going to become more and more sensitive to these processes of fabrication. That's precisely what the Buddha wants you to look at. Not just a vague awareness of your awareness, but simply, where is the fabrication going on in your mind right now? Where are your intentions in the mind right now? In what direction are they leading? This is the purpose of breath meditation, is to get you sensitive to those things. Now, there's a tradition in the forest tradition that says basically that when you're meditating like this, you are preparing. You're learning the skills you're going to need when you die. And the Buddha himself seems to say as much. There's a passage where he goes in and sees the monks in the sick ward. And he says, look, approach death, mindful and alert. And it defines alert, of course, being alert to what you're doing and the results of what you're doing. Mindful, he defines in terms of the establishments of mindfulness. So as you're trying to get the mind centered like this, and these are the instructions where you get into concentration. You're basically learning the skills that you will need as you die. Now, the things that are going to come in at that moment are basically the same problems that you encounter as you meditate. In other words, the hindrances. These are the things that get in the way of mindfulness, they get in the way of concentration, and they get in the way of discernment. In the passages where the Buddha talks about mind states that you have to watch out for as you're approaching death, 4 out of the 5 hindrances are mentioned explicitly. Sloth and torpor is the only one that's not mentioned. But because sloth and torpor would obscure your mindfulness and alertness, it's implicit there that this is something you've got to watch out for. So what are the 5 hindrances? You've got sensual desire. At the moment of death, you're going to be strongly attached to the body and to thoughts of sensual pleasures. This is one problem. Ill will, which might be directed at others for their past bad actions, wanting to see them punished. Think of what the Buddha had to say about that. To the soldier, asked him, my teachers told me that if I die in battle, I will go to the heaven of those heroes slain in battle. And what does the Buddha have to say about this? And the Buddha, in line with the etiquette of the time, decided this is not a topic he wanted to talk about. But the soldier asked him 3 times, so the Buddha had to answer. So he said, well, basically, if you're thinking, may these beings be destroyed, may these beings be harmed, if you die at that moment, okay, your mind would pull down to the hell of those slain in battle. In other words, that those It's precisely ill will that you have for people at that time. The other example he gives is of the bandits sawing you up with that saw. If you have ill will for them, you're going to be reborn in a bad place, a place that would wants to get back at them. And we have to be careful about ill will, because one of the ways in which ill will disguises itself is as justified anger, the desire for justice. You want to see somebody get their just deserts. They see someone who's going unpunished for their misdeeds, and you say, this person really deserves to suffer. That is ill will. And the ideal thing would be to take the attitude that the Buddha had toward Anglophone, seeing that even though Anglophone had murdered all those people, still he had the potential for awakening. And he could avoid a lot of suffering by awakening. I think we know the story that after he became a monk, there were a lot of people who were still upset about the fact that literally he was getting away with murder. And they would throw things at him when he was on his alms round. But that was going to be for their long-term harm, because here he was an arahant. So you have to watch out for your desire to see that justice be done, because it can lead you to a bad rebirth. A rebirth that's based on thoughts of revenge, or based on thoughts of wanting to avenge something. It's a bad rebirth. You don't want to go there. As I said, there's sloth and torpor is the third hindrance. It obscures your mindfulness and alertness. Worry, in other words, restlessness and anxiety, can also be a big hindrance at the moment of death. You'll be worried over the future of your loved ones, or concerned for any punishments that you may have for your own past misdeeds. These are the two big worries that the Buddha addresses. So that's something you will have to want to counteract. And then finally, doubt and uncertainty comes from not seeing the true Dharma. In other words, you haven't had an experience of the deathless yet. So there's going to be some doubts. And did the Buddha really know what he's talking about? Until you gain the Dharma eye, there's still going to be some doubt. So this is one of the things you have to work on, is what can I do to meditate in order to have that experience so I can overcome this doubt? Now, the antidotes for these, of the five, the first one that has to be addressed is uncertainty, because if you don't believe what the Buddha had to say, or are not confident in what he had to say, then it's going to be hard to counteract the other hindrances at that moment of death, to see them as the big problem facing you. So the Buddha gives various ways of addressing doubt prior to stream entry. The first one is what we call the Buddha's wagers. We all know Pascal's wager, but however, if there is a God, it's a good thing to obey him. If there is no God, that doesn't hurt you. You've lost nothing. Well, in the Buddhist sense, he says, if you live a skillful life, even if it turns out that there is no such thing as karma, there is no such thing as rebirth, you can hold yourself with a sense of honor that you've lived in a harmless way by developing skillful qualities in the mind and abandoning non-skillful ones. Also, he says to learn how to watch your own mind and try to make the distinction between what qualities in the mind are skillful and which ones are unskillful. And then notice when you act on skillful qualities, how does it change your life? What benefits do you have? And particularly, he recommends developing goodwill. This is of the very skillful qualities, this is probably the quickest one to see that if you have goodwill for others, you're going to behave in a lot more skillful way. And again, you can hold yourself honorable that you haven't harmed anybody, even if there are no results of karma, if there is no rebirth. And it gets you confident that yes, you can actually do this, because that's the other aspect of doubt. You may believe in what the Buddha had to say, but if you say, I can't do this, that's going to really get in the way. But you can see yourself, like, goodwill is not that hard to develop. Because you think about it, we're the people for whom you have ill will. And you can probably think of a few right off the bat. You say, well, what am I asked to do when I'm extending goodwill to them? It's basically, may this person see the error of their ways and change their ways so they can find true happiness. Now, that's something you can wish for anybody. The world will be a lot better place if people could see, I've been acting in an unskillful way, I should change my ways, without having to think about getting them punished or anything like that. You might say, well, there are certain people I'd like to see them hang in the wind a little bit before they would change their ways. And you have to remind yourself, well, nothing's really gained that way. Because there's very few people who undergo punishment like that who don't get a sense of being justified or feel that they've been mistreated. Very few people will see the connection between their misdeeds and their suffering. So ideally, you should say, okay, may they see the error of their ways and learn how to change them. Another one of the hindrances the Buddha gives instructions for, and these you can read in the readings, is how to deal with drowsiness. It starts with if you're meditating and you find that you're getting drowsy, well, change the topic of your meditation. If it's the breath, change the way you breathe first. And if you find that the breath, no matter how you breathe, you're still getting drowsy, try to give yourself a meditation topic that engages the mind more. You can think of the different parts of the body, or you can think about the bones in your skeleton. Start with the bones in the tips of your fingers. Where are they right now? Relax around them and move up to the second joint, third joint, into the palms of the hands, up to the wrist, up to the arm. Then start at the toes and work up through the body. Give yourself something more active to do. When I was in Thailand, there was a period when Ajaan Fuang was very sick, and we had a number of monks there looking after him. But one by one, the different monks kept finding other things that they had to do. And so I started taking on this monk's period of time of the day, and on that monk's period of the time of the day. And I ended up with the 2 a.m. to 8 p.m. shift. And all the other monks had 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. And so you can imagine me at 3 a.m. in the morning after not having got much sleep, looking after Ajaan Fuang and getting very drowsy. And I found that if I moved the spot of my focus as I was focusing on the breath, 3 breaths in the middle of the chest, 3 breaths here, 3 breaths there, I was able to keep myself awake. So that's one of the ways in which you can counteract drowsiness. Give yourself something more active to think about as you meditate. As for the remaining 3 hindrances, these are the ones that come up most often in the Buddha's instructions to people who are dying. Of them, worry comes up first. You're worried over the fate of others for whom you've been responsible. You have to, if you think those thoughts yourself, you just have to say, look, the time for that is past. There's nothing I can do right now. I've got something else that I have to focus on right now, which is the fact that I'm dying, and I better get my mind focused on that. There are a couple of incidences, they're in the readings you read about Nakula's mother talking to Nakula's father. Don't worry about me. She says, I'm going to be able to look after myself. I know how to sew. I know how to card wool. I know how to weave cloth. I can look after the kids. If you're worried that I'm going to take on another husband, don't worry. I'm going to be as faithful to you after you die as I was during your life. Turns out the husband doesn't die. And he goes to see the Buddha, and the Buddha said, you're really lucky that you have her as your teacher and counselor. So that's one thing you have to think about. Is if you find someone yourself, you're worried about your past responsibilities, you realize, okay, a human being can take on only so many responsibilities. There's going to have to be a time when you have to let them go. The time has come, let them go. If you're worried over your past actions and things you've done in the past that were unskillful. Here's another case where the Buddha has you develop the Brahma Viharas. First, you remind yourself, okay, that was unskillful. I don't want to make that mistake again. Then you spread goodwill to yourself, so you don't beat yourself up. And then goodwill to all beings. So you remind yourself, okay, I want to make sure I don't harm anybody. And in order to remind yourself of right view, this is where the Buddha says at the moment of death, it's good to think of your good actions. As you reflect on your generosity, reflect on your virtue, reflect on the qualities that lead someone to be a deva. So you realize, I do have some good to me. You focus on that. This has become a traditional practice throughout Theravada countries, that if somebody's dying, the people around them try to remind them not of the good times they've had in the past, but of the good things they've done. Of course, the antidote for ill will is thoughts of goodwill. The antidote to sensuality is the Buddhist contemplations on the drawbacks to the sensuality and the drawbacks of the body. Think of all those different images the Buddha gives of the sensuality as being like a dog chewing on some bones, where there's no flesh at all. And John Lee's telling of that particular image, he says it does have some flavor, which is the flavor of its own saliva. That's a good image to keep in mind. When you find yourself salivating over sensual pleasures, okay, that's it. You're just eating your own saliva. With the drawbacks to the body, you can think of the contemplation of the body in its 32 parts, or the fact that each of those parts is subject to an illness of one kind. You have an eye, well, there are eye illnesses. You have a mouth, there are mouth illnesses in the mouth. You have skin, there's skin illnesses. You go down the list. And do you really want to come to doctrine of the human body like this? This is where we get into those interesting instructions to Mahanama, where Mahanama is asking the Buddha, if someone is passing away while the Buddha is gone, how do you counsel them? And the Buddha says, okay, once you've gotten sure that they're no longer worried about their parents or their wives, their children, responsibilities they've had in the past, then ask them, are you still concerned about leaving your human sensuality? And if the person says yes, and you say, well, the devas have better sensuality than this, set your mind there instead. And so he starts out with the lowest level of the devas and works up, 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 up. And so you use sensuality of that kind to pull you away from your attraction to the human realm, because there are better realms to be in. And finally, you get to the point where you say, okay, we get to the Brahma realm. Well, even in the Brahma realm, they suffer from self-identity. It'd be good to let go of your self-identity. In other words, stop thinking in terms of self and worlds in that case, and just look at events in the mind in and of themselves. And it is possible, the Buddha said, at that moment that the person can find release. So here we see the role of a caregiver is to encourage positive thoughts and act as a memory aid for those whose memory is going as death approaches. Now, of course, going to a good destination is a good thing. It's much better than going to a bad one. There was a group of people who came to see Ajaan Fuang one time. They'd been studying Abhidhamma, and they'd heard that he was a good teacher, so they came to see him, and they asked what he taught. He said, well, get into meditation posture and start focusing on your breath. Oh, no, we can't focus on the breath. We're afraid we'll fall into jhana and be reborn as Brahmas. And he laughed. And he said, well, being born as a Brahma is not a bad thing. Even non-returners are reborn as Brahmas. And at any rate, being reborn as a Brahma is better than being reborn as a dog. So going for a good destination is not a bad thing. But you have to remember that going to a good destination the next time around doesn't guarantee that you're going to go to a good destination after that. So you're not 100% safe. And so this is where, if you want to go beyond any kind of good destination in samsara, this is where you have to understand becoming. You need to have to learn how to observe the steps leading there. This is what dependent core arising is all about. And learning how to see them in and of themselves. This is where you try to get rid of the narratives or worldviews that tend to come clustering in on you. You notice this, of course, when you sit down and meditate. Sometimes it's the narratives of the day. Sometimes it's old stuff coming up. I've noticed, especially during the pandemic, that people say these memories of childhood come up unbidden because, there's not much happening in your daily life right now. And so you tend to start focusing on things that happened in the past that come up very easily. Well, they're going to come up at the moment of death too. And so you have to learn how not to go running with those narratives, because they're going to create a sense of becoming, plus the fear around what you will become when you have to leave these things. So you have to develop the skills that you learn in not giving meaning to pleasures and pains, to the stories you tell yourself around them. In other words, to see these events as separate, just events coming and going in the mind, and to see where the appeal is, what's their allure, but also to see their drawbacks. Because the Buddha said the way to develop dispassion for things is look for the appeal. Why does the mind go for them? Look for the drawbacks. And then when you see that the drawbacks outweigh the allure, that's when you can develop the dispassion. Will give you a sense of release. So you overcome clinging not by trying to see everything as a oneness. You're actually trying to see these events in the mind simply as separate events that are part of a causal process. You can keep the mind on that level. As the Buddha said, you begin to see that it's just nothing but thoughts of your existence, or the existence of the world that occur to you at that time, or thoughts of your non-existence don't occur to you either, or the non-existence of the world. There's simply stress arising, stress passing away. You say, I don't need this. There must be something better. And that's when the mind inclines toward the deathless. And this is what gives you the freedom from attachment that you would need to keep going in order to keep on being a being. At that moment, when you're freed from attachment, you're also free from all the limitations that go with attachment. The Buddha's image is of a fire that's released from its attachment to a fuel. Remember those days, the theory was that fire burns because it's feeding on its fuel. At the same time, it's clinging to the fuel. And it's not the case that the fuel is clinging to the fire. So for the fire to be freed, the fire has to let go. In the same way, you're not the one who's being trapped by the narratives that you tell yourself. You're not the one that's being trapped by the pain that's coming up. You're the one that's holding on. It's your clinging that is trapping you. If you can learn how to let go, that's how you become free. And as the Buddha said, remind yourself that as you let go, you're not going into annihilation. The deathless, he says, is a good thing. He says if you see that the deathless would be something that wouldn't have any pain or any sense of limitation or any sense of nostalgia or regret, he says erase that thought because it's not true. The deathless is a good thing. So this is what the teachings are all aimed at. As I said, the Buddha started his quest for the Dharma looking for what would not die. It's because of his quest, because he stayed to it, stuck to it so thoroughly and so consistently, that we have the Dharma to practice now. Which means that when we think about issues of aging, illness, and death, they're not tangential applications of some Dharma that's meant to be just for the present moment. They're what the Dharma is all about. Because these are the big issues in life. If you want to understand how to live your life well, it's good to understand, well, what happens at death? How does the mind handle aging, illness, and death so it doesn't have to suffer? When you can answer those questions, and then you've taken care of all the things that would really weigh down the mind. And you've given a good direction to your life. So those are the thoughts I have for this afternoon. And we will open the floor to questions.
Quill?
Thank you so much, Bhante, for your teaching today and your enormous commitment to writing and websites and all you do. I appreciate it. Thank you for taking my question. I'm an end-of-life doula, and I have a couple questions around that. One is compassionate choice. When I first began, I was quite black and white about it. It was just I can't support people who make this choice. As I've gone along, I'm starting to find differences with intention, and I'm wondering what you have to say about that.
Euthanasia?
Well, euthanasia, or in California, you can have assistance from a medical person if you meet certain criteria.
Okay, well, from the Buddhist point of view, that's not a skillful approach.
So what if someone makes that choice and I've been working with them? Then do I just go, sorry, I can't be here, I can't help you?
Okay, which is that this is something I can't assist you with. I'll get you in touch with somebody who can, but I can't do that.
Okay, thank you. I also wonder what you would say around doing metta for people who've already died.
Spread them as much metta as you want.
Okay, good, thanks. Sometimes they tell you not to do that, so.
Why? Why?
I don't know, but I've heard that from just before. Yeah.
Well, there is the distinction that when you dedicate merit, that's something you do to people who have passed away.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're dedicating merit, basically the person to whom it's being dedicated has to express appreciation for it. Now you can do that with people who are alive, but it's kind of embarrassing. You say, I made some merit for you the other day and I dedicated it. I hope you're happy.
Yeah.
Now, if there's somebody you can say that to without embarrassment, and they actually would be happy. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, my third question is just around the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
In my experience, when I am in a very concentrated state, present moment isn't really. It's a movement, so there's no stopping at a moment. And yeah, so I'm not sure how to be doing it in the present moment. I'm just with what is.
Yeah, exactly. Some people say when you're in the present moment, you're outside of time, but that's not the case. Time is very much there. You can see it slipping away. And so what you want to do is say, okay, given that this is where I am right now in this sort of this flow, okay, to what extent am I contributing to the flow, and especially to what extent I'm contributing to any stress or suffering in the flow?
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Peter?
Okay, Taan Ajaan, so I have a question about the hindrance of being worries or anxiousness, I suspect that maybe a glimpse of what I could expect towards death. So my morning meditation is very often thoughts about the day flood me, but in a way that, well, they're fears or anxieties, but not of anything that's really scary. It's mostly thoughts about angry people that I'm gonna meet, angry phone calls, generate tense. I have this tense profession. And I know the allure, like going over what's gonna happen to me in the future sometimes helps because I can plan, I can or find an idea or solve a problem. So there is allure, and I know that. There are also drawbacks because I know it ruins my morning meditation, because evening meditation is easy compared to that. The mornings are difficult. To the point that I'm sometimes afraid to sit because I know I'm gonna waste this hour or half an hour. So can you give me some advice?
Okay, I would say, make a promise with yourself that the last 10 minutes of the meditation, you will think about these issues. And then be very strict with yourself for the remainder of the time that you're not going to think about them. And tell yourself, I'll be able to think about them more clearly because I have meditated and allowed the mind to get quiet. The quiet mind is a much better source for insight than a worried mind. So make that promise with yourself. Okay, I will think about these things, say the last 10 minutes. And then in the meantime, I get nope, 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 nope. And this is where you get out your karate chop.
But they're mostly rubbish. I don't want to think about them at all. Not even for 10 minutes.
Okay, well, but I mean, it's part of the practice is learning how to prevent unskillful qualities from arising in the future, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to prepare. I don't want to say anything unskillful to the people that I will meet or the angry phone calls that I'm going to receive in the course of the day. So take some time to think about it, think it through. Say, okay, there must be a skillful way of doing this.
And during the morning session, when you replied that we should treat these voices with goodwill, were you thinking about this kind of voices or something else? Because I thought when you talked about intrusive thoughts, this was the kind of voices that we're supposed to treat with goodwill.
Yeah,
So
well, but there's the part of you that is legitimately worried about making a big error in the course of the day, right? So have some goodwill for that part. Don't brush it aside. Don't mistreat it, because it will rebel after a while.
Okay. It just it doesn't seem to make any sense this morning because it's completely gone by afternoon.
But it's just one of those cases where I want to survive the day, and when you get the afternoon, I'm pretty close to survival now.
Something
in the
like
morning,
that.
the morning seems awfully long, and the day seems awfully long in the morning. So it's good to say, okay, humor that voice a little bit. So okay, let's you probably know of at least one person who will call you in the course of the day who might get angry. So think about that person in particular. Spread goodwill to that person, and also then think, okay, what would be a skillful way of dealing with this person's way of dealing? And that way, that little voice will probably then give you more time to actually do your meditation for the rest of that 15 minutes.
I'll try. Thank you.
Jeff and Rita.
Hi, Taan Ajaan. Thank you very much for teaching today, as always. I want to go back to the issue of karma. And for those of us with sort of performance anxieties, this moment of death, reflection, contemplation can be incredibly daunting. And sometimes I think I get caught in seeing karma as a sentencing versus like a quintessential tool and teaching to be used to help guide me throughout my life, rather than just that moment of death. And so I think I even heard, I guess simply based on the suttas that I've come across, there seems to be a pointed effort, a focus on the heaviness of unskillful actions. And I think was it Ajahn Chah who said, rather than doing good, don't do any harm, which seems to suggest a focus of not doing anything unskillful would mean that I was already doing something skillful. So if I
think
focus
Ajahn Chah there is talking to people who would like to be generous a lot, but are not particularly concerned about observing the precepts.
okay.
And this is a problem that I ran into when I was teaching in Thailand. That there are people who are happy to be generous, but they didn't want to be bothered with the precepts. And so he's saying, look, you've got to take them seriously. Now, if you find that you're taking them so seriously that you can't function, say, okay, back off a little bit. Remember the goodness that you've done.
Okay. So there's just as much weight given by the Buddha in doing skillful as avoiding unskillful.
Right. I mean, this is why he has you do recollection of your virtue, recollection of your generosity, recollection of the qualities of the devas. I mean, these are things you have. Focus on those to lift your spirits.
Okay. Okay. So just as many opportunities as doing good and focusing on that versus focusing on what I might get into trouble-wise.
Right.
Choose to look for something skillful.
Right.
And then do I understand correctly that the karma that will happen, if it's a good rebirth, even the Deva realms or the Brahma realms, they could be adversely affected by unskillfulness that we've done. And it would be either to make those positive realms somehow unpleasant or shorten the span. Well,
the only places they have is the passage on the betas who have palaces. The hungry ghosts who have palaces. In other words, they spend half the day in their palace and half the day wandering around outside.
Oh, so it's just a strictly positive experience. I guess
the Deva realms are pretty positive, yes.
Okay. I guess I'm thinking of like the hell realms where, the Buddha had that one thought of helping somebody who was being beaten and he left the hell realms immediately. So that shortened his length of stay just by having had past good karma. So I guess it's just it's a complexity then. After your Deva realms, you're going to pay for more.
Maybe, which means that if you're in a Deva realm, make sure you're determined to practice.
So you can approach death with that if you haven't entered the stream with, I want to be in a Deva realm practicing.
Right.
Okay. So lastly, does the Buddha ever give suggestion of just the strength of practicing his teachings for awakening, like he does going to the hell realms? Does he ever say, if you're doing my teachings, you're gonna be pretty sound?
Well, it basically says, if you follow his teachings, you're not creating any of the causes for going to the lower realms. Now, you may have some past bad karma, which these can erase, but remember the image of the lump of salt in the river.
Right.
Okay. You can mitigate what you've done in the past by developing expansive mind states.
Okay, great. So in essence, continue to focus on skillful and not to
keep on doing good. Keep on doing good. Yeah.
And you're going to do well.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, Reed also has a question.
Yeah. Can this be a 2-for-1?
Yeah.
So as I've been considering death and the transition, I've started to sense some fear coming up with claustrophobia. And I was wondering if you could give any recommendations on how to work with that.
Think of a sense of space.
Space?
Yeah. I told you that story about a Ajaan Fuang student who was meditating one night and his voice came to her and said, "You're going to die." And she couldn't stay anywhere in her body. She couldn't focus in it because she said it was like a house of fire. Every room we went into was on flame. And then she thought of space. And so she took space as her object. And if she had died at that time, she probably would have become a space data. But At least that gets you out of that feeling of everything's kind of closing in on you.
Okay, so as I envision like losing contact with the sense doors, just maybe focus on cultivating more of an awareness of space then. Okay, thank you.
Steve Ross.
Thank you. I want to come back to Quillie's question about, she talked about assisted suicide, and you mentioned euthanasia. But suicide itself and the decision that a person simply doesn't, well, I won't phrase it that way, but what confuses me is that in the suttas, we see examples of some arahants who end their lives with a knife or what have you. I have not been able to understand how, because you said that's not a skillful way, the assisted suicide or
No,
euthanasia.
the Buddha said that the arhat suicide is the only suicide that is not blameworthy.
Ah,
In other words, they do it without any greed, aversion, or delusion.
right. That's in the canon.
Yeah, I forgot which sutta it's in, but it's in one of the suttas.
Okay, thank you. That clears everything up. Thank you very much.
Steve Wells.
Thank you. I've been studying in the Thai forest tradition for several years, but my teacher has not spoken of their teachings around death and dying. And I'm just wondering if there's some correlation between those teachings and the Tibetan Bardo teachings.
Okay, there. Yeah, I think I mentioned my teacher had a number of students who were psychic, and they could see different people as they were going through the transition. And each person's transition is going to be very different depending on their past karma. In other cases, there's some cases where they go through certain stages before they're reborn. In other cases, that's just like their vacuum cleaner pulls them out and they're someplace else right away. Like that case I said, where the woman saw the dead bodies on the side of the road, but also saw those people standing around looking kind of lost. So sometimes I guess for lack of a better word, the spirit will be hanging around. And in cases like that, she would stop, spread goodwill to them, and then they would move on. Others just go right on. And there's a huge near-death experience literature in Thailand. And one of the common themes is that there's kind of a police clearing room where there's somebody sitting behind a desk and they've got the ledger for where you go. And in each case, of course, the sergeant in charge looks at the ledger. Oh, it's not this person's time yet. And so they get sent back. But sometimes they get the spirit guide says, well, as long as you're here, do you want to see a little bit of heaven and hell? It's, oh, sure, it'd be great. So they wander around and they come back and then they tell their experiences. My favorite one was this one guy was going to this heaven, and all the devas were dressed in the kind of the traditional Thai style dress. And so he asked his guide, he says, is this just a heaven for Buddhists? Are there no other religions here in heaven? And so, oh no, we've got plenty of Christians and Muslims and other Hindus and whatnot. He says, well, aren't they kind of surprised to see all the devas wearing Thai clothing like this? And the guy said, you see us as you expect to see us. So the thing about going through the Bardos is they don't have that. And there's no set of stages that everybody's going to have to go through. It's going to depend on your karma, whether it's something a very good karma pull you up right away or whatever.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ginny?
Jenny, yeah. Hi, Ajaan Geoff. So this question might be one of those unanswerable questions, but what is it that gets reborn? Is it the karma?
Well, this is precisely what the Buddha says he didn't focus on.
Right, okay.
He focused more on, okay, how does the process happen? Because that's something you can actually do something about. I mean, if you want to take on an identity, you create your identity around what you're attached to. But the whole point is,
what did you say?
you create your identity about the things you're around, the things you're attached to. That's what you are as a being, is your attachments. And so he wants to take attention away from that question. Because as soon as you say, well, what am I? And you're going to grab onto this, this, and this, and make that into yourself. And so he's trying to get you to get that way of looking at things in terms of simply actions in and of themselves. What am I doing? And what is it leading to? So that's where you want to focus.
Okay. I think I understand that.
Okay.
Gita.
Wonderful to see you, Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu. Thank you for teaching all of us. Thank you. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Bhante, I had a question on the 12 links. And I've heard two schools of thought, and I think both are possibly correct. One is that you can break the links at any point. And the second is that you could break the links at contact with the 5 sense faculties, and then feeling arises, neutral, happy, and sad. And then from there, our intention, and then clinging and craving. So if we break it at that point, would it help to contemplate on anicca, anatta, and dukkha? Impermanence, not self, right? And suffering, right?
Right. Okay. You can break the chain anywhere. There are 2 passages in the canon where the Buddha talks about every chain, every link in the chain is one where you can possibly make the break. And in each case, he recommends that you look at it in terms of the 4 Noble Truths. What is the suffering around this thing? And then what is the origination of that suffering around this thing? What can I do to stop it? Now, one of the ways that you're going to stop it is to develop this passion for it. And one way to develop this passion, of course, is once you've seen the allure, then you try to look at it in terms of the three perceptions. Anicca, dukkha, anatta.
Yep. And nibbida. So to develop nibbida will help.
Because you have to develop a sense of disenchantment, yeah.
Okay, Bhante. Thank you so much. So wonderful to see you. Thank you.
Isabel.
Thank you, Taan Ajaan. It's good to see you. My question is twofold. The first is, what kind of chants or thoughts can I send to someone who is dying or who has just died and I'm not with them? And then the second one related is that different for someone who has died because of assisted suicide?
Okay, lots of goodwill. Thoughts of goodwill. If you want to chant, there's the Garaniya Metta Sutta, which is basically about goodwill. And remember, the Buddha never kept his teachings for only those who don't deserve to suffer. In other words, no matter what you've done in the past, whatever reason you're suffering, may you stop suffering. So it doesn't really matter how they died or what, you still send thoughts of goodwill. And then dedicate the merit of your practice to that person.
Thank you.
Sylvia.
Good afternoon, Taan Ajaan. Thank you for your wonderful talk. I have a question regarding the natural and unnatural death. Let's say that you're struck in the natural disasters like an earthquake or lightning strikes or car hits you suddenly. How can we prepare for that when it's like a split second? How can we still be mindful and alert at times like that? Fear, I think, is the last mistake.
Okay. Basically, the Buddha says there was a similar case like this in the sutras where Mahanama comes to say, the Buddha says, what if an elephant strikes me? It's going to be that was their version of a car crash. Getting trampled by an elephant, and it was the same sort of thing. He said, just keep your mindfulness. Just remind yourself, okay, the time has come. I just got to drop things.
Okay.
And this is one of the reasons why the Ajahns encourage you to stay with the breath as much as you can as you go through the day. So if anything unexpected comes up, okay, you're there, you're ready, you're ready.
Thank you.
Drake.
Hello, Ajahn. Thank you. Thank you for everything. I saw in the readings you included MN 143. I don't think you talked about it just now, or didn't explicitly talk about it, but in that sutta, Sariputta is talking to on a authentic, and he's basically walking them through things to let go of, basically. Don't cling to this, don't cling to this. And it's like, don't cling to the I, don't cling to forms, don't cling to I consciousness. And then it goes through like contact and feelings and fabrications and jhanic realms. And I'm just wondering if that progression of that list shows up anywhere else. Is that a list that I'm not recognizing somehow? Or
That's the only thing where that particular list appears.
Okay, because it doesn't seem like a, well, maybe there's some order to it that I just don't see very easily, but.
Well, maybe Sariputta was reading his mind.
Oh, I see. Okay, perfect. And something I didn't think was related to today's topic, but maybe it is. Every night before I fall asleep, as I'm falling asleep, I do some meditation, and it keeps occurring to me that might not be sort of often advised against, to meditate until you fall asleep. I was just wondering, I can't remember you saying either way.
It's perfectly fine.
Okay.
But also meditate at some other time of the day too, so your meditation doesn't always end in sleep.
Yes. Okay. Yes. For sure.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Kevin. Kevin, China.
Oh yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you, Taan Ajaan, for I want to show my greatest respect to you for my wife and me, for your current talk and the past ones. My English is poor, so I apologize first. So I want to report my daily practice first, and I have a short question later. So I listen to your talks every day. And I, in the morning, every time I sit like half an hour, I listen to your talks, whole body breathes, very good, very nice. And in the noon, I have a like snap of half an hour. By that time, with fewer awareness, but the refreshment is also good. So after I finish my work, I go to practice some yoga. Though the mind is much more restless than the past two, but I still always remind myself that you said we should try to be aware, just remind. And later, after the yoga, the awareness come back, the body feel good and the mind quality become better. So because of that, because I practice that day by day, and I would like to report that my addiction to gaming is decreasing dramatically. Because before, I also practice, but the mind is very weak in the night, so he cannot stop attached to the gaming, though the gaming is very exhausted. But nowadays, because the value judgment system is slowly created, so when he finds the mind and the body is have more high quality, so the mind immediately drop the gaming because it's not worth it. Sometimes I also I also hold the gaming, but quality is so it's a bad business. So the mind I can see is very shocked. He slowly transferred to the good side. So I was so how to say thanks for you teaching, because it's not very easy. I've tried many years, many teachers, and thank you very much, Ajahn, your teaching for me to slowly can see the mind is changed to another way. So this is my first report. And second is, I see sometimes, I just say one question is that I saw sometimes, many times, the mind is have a pattern that he was saying, for example, when I go to have the weekend, things will become better. Something like if the holiday comes, things becomes better. Like he want to change the beings. I don't know if I say clearly. For example, you are said now the days is too busy, too suffering. The weekends will be better. For example, also like the holidays will become better. Means these days he want to forget now the present. And I found that the mind have that kind of pattern. You want to forget the present and hold the concept like later. For example, weekends, for example, the holiday. Is that the truth?
No. Run that question past me again.
So I want to say that I find many times the mind, when he was the condition is not good, he will think wander away. The mind will think if I have the weekends, if the weekends comes, the things will become better than now. I saw many times like the holiday comes, he think when the holiday comes, then the.
Got your question. I got your question. Yeah. Well, basically, if it's one way that helps you have some patience and endurance with the difficult situations, reminding yourself, okay, things will get better. That's one way of doing it. Now, in order to have some patience with what's going on and endurance. The other way, of course, is to remind yourself, well, even though conditions outside are not that good, I can still breathe comfortably in the midst of all this. Right now, I can find some pleasure. So you don't have to wait until the holiday or wait till the weekend in order to have a good time. You can say, okay, there are still some opportunities for pleasure here, even in a difficult circumstance.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Alex?
So, Taan Ajaan, I had a question. You mentioned goodwill quite a lot, and in the first part. So I just want to check something with you. So my understanding is that goodwill is about intention. So that when we're practicing metta, that we should be thinking about the intention to not do harm. So it's about the action rather than focusing just on like spreading this sense of people doing well.
You want to do both. Think about how, it would really be good to see people happy.
Yeah.
And how do they go about that? Well, what can I do to help them? Because they're going to be the ones that will have to create the causes for happiness through their actions. Is there anything that I can help?
So your focus, is it the intention that you focus on when you're practicing?
Focus on the intention and also on what you hope. The intention aims at happiness for everybody.
So the other thing that's connected with that is that there's a relationship. Am I right in thinking there's a relationship between sila, which is a kind of protection, and goodwill? They share that same aspect of protecting your mind. Is that right?
Right. Because they both have to do with intention. It's simply that goodwill is part of the motivation for observing the precepts. This is one way of being harmless.
Got it. Great. So, if you wanted to develop goodwill to further as much as possible, could you take it as a concentration practice?
Oh yes. And again, this would be something that it depends on your individual tendencies. Some people find goodwill an easy topic to use as a concentration practice. Other people find it a little bit too vague, and they need the body as a grounding. So this will be an individual matter.
So when I'm practicing goodwill, that there's a whole sort of sentence which you can say, may all beings be well and happy, may they be free from suffering, animosity, etc. But I find that can be a bit laborious That's
Okay. Well,
harsh,
then you shorten it down to one word, which is metta, or goodwill.
And you can just keep that word in mind. And
yes.
If there's no feeling, does that still, as long as there's the thought and intention, because sometimes
there's the intention, because sometimes the feeling doesn't come. You say, well, I've got to work on the intention. Because those metta phrases, there are a few that are found in the canon, but they're not nearly as elaborate. But basically, is may all beings be happy, and also may they all act in a skillful way, because that's going to be the causes for their happiness.
So it comes back to karma.
Right. And then for a concentration practice, then you shorten it to one word.
There was just a quick question, if that's okay, about the conversation between Sariputta and Ananda Pindika. When he goes through all the different stages, aspects of things not to cling to anywhere or anything, is that a reflection, like a contemplation to reflect on as a practice, or is it a concentration practice? Or is it,
it's basically a discernment practice. You know, are you attached to this? Okay, let it go. Attached to this, let it go. Now, hopefully, Ananda Pindika had his mind concentrated at the time, because it requires a fair amount of concentration to see clearly what it is you're attached to.
So a bit of both, maybe, reflection and concentration.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Hindu?
Taan Ajaan, so just coming back to a question that was asked before, you know how apparently in the suttas there's like arahants who commit suicide, and that's okay. So given that they've got this sort of undisturbed happiness, I'm guessing that the suffering of their bodies are just easily managed. Why would they want to kill themselves?
Because they see that they're just a burden to other people.
Oh, wow.
They don't want to be burdensome.
Okay. I had two other quick questions. One is to do with, so if someone's like, for a practitioner, I understand at the moment of death, like your intention should be, okay, where can I practice the Dharma the best? Let's go there. But if it's someone who's culturally Buddhist, like my dad, who's not like a big practitioner, and even listening to like talks on Nibbana gets him all agitated, and he's like, no, it's not time yet. For a person like that, telling him, okay, so maybe your intention should be somewhere you could practice, you should go for somewhere, aim for somewhere where you need to practice, doesn't really feel like it's going to be effective, because that's not where his mind's at. So what could I tell him to aim for?
Tell him to aim for a state of being in which he's harmless.
Harmless. Okay. Could I ask him to aim for somewhere where it's like a lot of pleasure, hoping that it'll be a deva realm?
Well, you never know what pleasure he's going to latch onto it. You know, that at that moment, so this looks pretty good.
Yeah.
You know the story of the two friends who are practicing, and one of them dies, becomes a deva, and the other one becomes a fly in an outhouse.
Yeah.
And so the deva goes down and says, "Where's my friend? What happened to him?" He sees him as a fly down in the outhouse. So he goes down and talks to him. He says, "What are you doing down here?" And the friend says, "What do you mean down here? I'm in heaven." See, my head is green. I'm in Indra, you know, and food falls out of the sky. More food than I can eat falls out of the sky every day. So don't just go for pleasure. Go for harmless pleasure.
Okay, harmless pleasure. Okay. And the other quick question I had was, so I've been falling into this trap of thinking something is good enough and thinking that it's a skillful way of thinking, but it's also quite an easy mask for laziness and also not going for high expectations for the day. So what I'm doing now is to kind of reflect at the end of the day, okay, well, did I have a good day where I met my expectations, or did I just say things are good enough and just kind of like walked off? But the thing is, when I do that reflection, is there's a relentless voice in my mind that tells me that I could do better. And I don't know how to manage that because there's always things I could do better. So do I just keep driving myself? Because that sounds like a lot of pain. Or
Hey, tell you something, I will do one extra thing better every day.
okay.
Just throw a little something for good measure.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Eileen?
Energy. I wanted to ask about mindfulness of death because there's part of me that is already doing it. My birthday's coming up on Tuesday. If I live that long, I'm going to be 70. And that's in my mind. But there's another part of my mind that's saying, mindfulness of death, that's heavy. And, that sounds weird. And if I told my friends what I was doing this Saturday, they'd go, what did you do? So there's the ambivalence. And I'm just wondering what I can do. I'm not going to tell my friends about it yet, but what can I do to help myself not to help the resistant part? What can I tell it to come along?
Well, basically, remember, mindfulness of death is not just thinking death all the time, but thinking, I have the opportunity with this breath to do something good. What can I do with it? That's what it's all about.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Todd?
Taan Ajaan. All this talk about the realms, I'm getting a little bit confused about what I should be aiming for. I had thought I heard at one point that the human realm was the best realm to practice in. But it sounds like now I was hearing you say going to some other realms like Deva or Brahman realm might be better. But what should we be aiming for? Or I don't trust my own judgment. I'm afraid I'm going to pick the wrong one because my mind's not very wise a lot of the time.
Well, don't choose anything below the human realm, okay?
Okay. But is there one realm that's the best realm, or does it depends on your condition?
They say that the realm of the contented devas is a really good one to practice in. They're the ones that are kind of wise about pleasure, and they're sort of far-seeing devas, and they can see the the dangers of being heedless. Ajaan Suwat made a comment to some of his students who visited from Bangkok one time. He said, the human realm is going to get pretty bad. Don't come back to the human realm. Try for a deva realm. So.
I could see that happening. I mean, I can see that coming. It's like,
yeah.
Thank you.
Ajaan Fuang?
Thank you for your Thank you for your teaching, Bante. My question is about follow-up with Gita about the 12 links of dependent origination, Bante. I don't understand how we can break the cycle at any point because like becoming or say rebirth, it seems like when we say that, it's like we have the control over the natural cycle of things. I thought that we should just break it at ignorance by having wisdom.
Okay, basically, it's bringing wisdom to any of the things. You don't just cut with the scissors. You have to cut with knowledge. And so, if you bring knowledge of the Four Noble Truths to any of the factors, basically, it's any of the factors up to clinging. Once you've hit clinging, you're suffering already. So I have to turn back and look at the craving because you have to cut it at the craving. So anything from fabrication up through craving, you can cut it. Yes, as long as you bring knowledge to that particular connection.
Thank you, Bante.
Marisol?
Ajaan Geoff, I'm afraid your answer to a previous question about the arhants committing suicide because they thought they were too much of a burden makes me think of me. I mean, if they are too much of a burden, I must be, 5,000 times much more of a burden than.
No, their work is done. Their work is done. They just want to go. Your work isn't done yet.
I know. Yeah,
So that's why you have to
I'm-
hang around and work on it.
I'm sorry?
That's why you have to hang around and work on it.
Okay, so so their work is done and they've earned the luxury of being able to, you know,
Okay.
bow out, I guess. Okay, I haven't earned that yet.
Definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Olivia?
Hello, Ajaan Geoff. Sorry, no video. I just want to say that I think with everything we've heard you say today, and as we learn about self and not self, the way out appears to be fabrications, clearing out the misfabrications we have in our mind in order to end suffering. But for me, whenever I try to attempt to, whenever I see that I'm going off track and I try to change the perceptions, and in order to stay with things as they are in and of themselves and not of the world, because, you know, the corporate world ideas come in, diffusing things that relate to the Four Noble Truths. I just wondered if you were going to write a Dhamma app that we could all plug into our minds to clear all of this. I mean, it's ongoing, and it really appears to be that, you know, just clearing the fabrications and thinning them down and refining them is the way out.
Yeah.
What can I keep in mind when I sit down to meditate, or even when I'm walking around and thoughts come into my head? What can I keep in mind in order to stay in what's happening in and of itself, and in order to stay within the parameters of the Four Noble Truths? I think if I have something like that to put me back on track, I'd be able to say, oh, and if this is the case and this is it, then this is what I need to do. Can you give me some guidance?
Well, this is why the Buddha has those four frames of reference for establishing mindfulness. You choose any one of the four. It's like, I'm just going to make this a constant practice of being with the body in and of itself, or feelings in and of themselves, and have my mind keep returning to that as much as I can. And you bring in issues of the world only when you have to deal with people in the world or other issues in the world. And try to make this your default mode, that you're going to go back to, okay, just feelings in and of themselves, or the body's in and of itself. So try to hold that in mind as your frame of reference.
Okay, and so that will help stabilize the mind in any one of those frames, right, from which, okay. Thank you, Ajaan Geoff.
Welcome.
Diane? I don't know if I said your name right, sorry.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you, Ajahn, for the generosity this Dhamma to us. My question will be about, is having an aspiration to rebirth in a better place like Deva realm or Brahma realm constitute as identity view in lower factors? Thank you.
Okay, I mean, there will, as long as you have that sense of identity, yes, I want to be reborn here, I want to be reborn there. There is a sense of identity that goes with that. But there, as long as you still need a sense of identity in order to function, you try to choose a skillful one.
So in that case, in our practice, we shouldn't aim to be rebirth in the good realm, but to liberation, right, Ajahn?
Right, you should aim at liberation, but also, I had to say this, but hedge your bets, so that you have prepared, and just in case I don't make it all the way into arhatship in this lifetime, I'll have some good things to fall back on, good places to practice.
I see. Thank you very much, Ajahn.
So Taan Ajaan, that concludes all the questions.
Okay. Were there some questions in the chat?
I had I had a few questions, if you don't mind.
Okay, sure, go ahead.
So one was the Buddha's wager versus the Pascal's wager, which you actually brought up, which I thought was very interesting. I was just thinking a little bit about it, and I noticed that Pascal's wager was more for the end goal that he was driving for was that you would adopt a particular belief in God in that particular case. Whereas in the version of the Buddha's wager that you actually presented, if I understand correctly, there are two versions, both of which are connected. One was basically towards skillfulness of actions, towards making you more skillful. But the other one is also a set of beliefs, right view. There are 4 different gradations of right view, all the way culminating in view that, okay, Nibbana is possible.
Yeah.
Both of these are connected, but I often find that people, at least most of the times, people seem to be more comfortable with the one which is expressed just in terms of skillful actions, not so comfortable with the one that is expressed in terms of the 4 gradations of belief in, the 4 different right views. Can you speak a little bit to that? And can you kind of clarify how we should arrange our mind around this, maybe to understand this a little better?
Well, the idea that there is nirvana, some people find a little bit too daunting.
Right.
And if I really believed in nirvana, it would require more of me. Or if I really believed in rebirth, it would require more of me.
Right.
It's interesting that this question is being brought up here in the study center.
I do not belong to the study center.
Okay.
So
No, but in under their ages, because there was one year that I was saying, there are all these courses where people say, imagine that you have only 1 year left to live, and you get together as a group and you say, what is the date that we're going to assign kind of as our cutoff date, and imagine what it would be like if this were our last year to live. And I said, what you really ought to do is get a group of people together and say, what if we really believed in rebirth? Let's live our life for 1 year as if we really believed in rebirth. And a year after that, someone came up to me, and he had been at the previous session, and he said, when you said that, I really resisted it.
Yeah.
And so I looked into it. Why do I resist this idea? And he said, it made me realize I would have to live a much better life.
Okay. The other thing that I had as a question, sorry I'm taking so long. I thought you said somewhere in between that there are only 4 of the 5 hindrances that appear at the moment of death. But when you
they can all appear. It's just that in the Pali Canon, when they mention the hindrances that can appear at death, they make explicit reference only to 4.
Okay. So even though
the sloth and torpor is implicitly there when the Buddha is saying, be mindful and alert. It's basically don't be slothful, don't be torpid.
Okay. Then the other question that was coming up was remembering the triple gem at the moment of death. Is that of any value? Because I've been told that remembering the Buddha, Dharma, and Saṅgha is a kind of right view. It's connected with the right view in a way.
Well, it's connected with conviction, and our conviction in the Buddha is because of what? Because we believe that he really was awakened.
Right.
So that connects with conviction as a quality that's useful to have.
In that particular context, is it more useful to actually just think that, okay, awakening is possible, or is it more useful to think that this was the one stage whose teachings are the ones that actually lead to awakening? Which one is actually?
Well, you want to have both. Yes, it is possible, and this is the guy who knows the way.
Okay, both of those are required. Okay. The one question that was coming around about spirits was that, oftentimes I've heard, at least whenever a talk around spirits actually starts somewhere in, among my friends or something, Dhamma friends, usually the question comes about, is there anything over there? Is there anything there? And sometimes some people say there is nothing there. You can't really pinpoint what is there. Can you point out this is the one that is the spirit, that is the one that is the spirit? But I thought of answering that in this way. I thought, why not we say, okay, what is it clinging to? Is there something that it can cling to? And if there is something that is clinging to, whatever being is there that is actually clinging to it, that would be the spirit.
Okay. Okay.
Because what we think of as spirits is actually kind of an interim rebirth.
Right.
And again, the rebirth comes because of what? It becomes a becoming, and becoming happens because of clinging.
Mm. Okay. Okay. Last question. One thing that you mentioned was justice. Don't bother about it at the moment of death. Okay, that somebody deserves to suffer at the moment of death. That it almost seems like, you know, we've been you've also given one interesting talk, and you've written an essay also on goodwill over justice or something, wisdom
over justice, yeah.
Wisdom over justice. And seems like justice is at loggerheads with Nibbana. Is that a true statement?
Well, again, where it is at loggerheads, you have to choose the wise path. But there are a lot of times where it's not at loggerheads. I mean, you try to arrange things and try to get things to settle down, is figure out who made the mistake and how we can correct it. That kind of justice is okay. But there are certain cases where you're going to have to choose. Either I'm going to have to go for justice, or I'm going to have to go for the wise course. And okay, in that case, I've just got to go for the wise course and let this go. That's where equanimity comes in.
And because it, to an extent, justice does not really hold at the ultimate level when it comes to Nibbana, we're probably lucky in the sense that we can actually get out if justice were to.
Well, as you said, if you had to repay for all your mistakes,
you would never get out.
You never get out.
Okay.
And so you don't have to make everybody else pay for their mistakes either.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I took so much time.
There's some questions. There's some questions in the chat.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to read to you.
There are. Okay, yes.
One of them is, would it be unskillful if one is terminally ill but die without assistance, but choose to stop eating and drinking?
That's your choice.
Okay, another question. In some cultures in the past, an aged or ill person would choose to be left or die or stop eating in order to benefit the family or tribe so as not to be a burden. That is not greed or craving, or is it delusion?
Okay. Basically, it's you're just leaving yourself out to die at a natural pace. And here again, this is one of those cases where that's your choice.
Okay. Another question.
When you know, at that time when Ajaan Chah had that operation, which made him non-functional, and they kept him going on artificial life support, every Ajaan in Thailand told their students, "Don't do that to me. When the time comes to go, just let me go."
Okay, thank you. One question, next question. Would it be skillful if one is terminally ill but die without assistance, but choose to stop eating and drinking?
We did that, right? Yeah. The other one is, dear Ajaan, could you please explain more about why the compassion and choice is not a skillful way for death? The patients all have terminal illness and have 6 months left. If a Buddhist choose it to die, what will be the result of his or her afterlife?
Okay, they basically, this is their chance to continue learning how to deal with pain. A lot of useful lessons can be learned that way, because you don't know when you go, if you choose to die. A lot of this desire to die is the idea of being able to put an end to your suffering. We really don't know. You could go to a worse place. As a human being, and if you're a practitioner, you still have the opportunity to practice. So go ahead and keep on practicing.
Okay, one more question. Is it okay to receive pain during medication like opiates near death? Would it be unskillful in terms of mindfulness?
Okay, you can take doses that don't interfere with your mindfulness. You know, those places where they allow the patients to control the amount of morphine that they're getting, whatever. They tend to take a lot less than when the nurses come around and give them shots, because the nurses have to compensate for the fact they're not going to be able to give a shot for another 24 hours or whatever. And so they tend to overdose the patients. Whereas when you're on the drip, you can control it better. And the patients tend to be more mindful and use a lot less of the painkiller.
Thank you, Taan Ajaan. I don't see anything else in the stream.
I think there was another question that you missed from Stephanie.
Yeah, go ahead. Please go ahead and read it out.
Oh, okay.
if you can see it. I'm
Yeah.
kind of
Dear Ajahn, what's a skillful way to help a person who's at the end of their life, do not study the Dhamma, and who have a lot of remorse about things they have done? Thank you so much for your teachings.
Okay, remind them that the best thing you can do about remorse about things you've done is to just make up your mind that you recognize that as a mistake and you resolve not to repeat the mistake, and then just have lots and lots and lots of goodwill. Develop goodwill for all beings. In doing research for this particular issue, I kept coming up again and again and again how much goodwill plays a role in dealing with illness. Goodwill plays a role in dealing with worrying. It plays a role in dealing with, of course, with ill will. It plays a role in dealing with uncertainty. It's one of the ways in which you can prepare yourself for a good rebirth. So the practice of goodwill is a very important part of preparing for aging, illness, and death. More than I would have suspected. Okay, well, I hope this has been helpful.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Taan Ajaan. Did you say anything about chanting?
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you very much, Taan Ajaan.
Thank you, and thank you to all the organizers. Thank you, Bhante. Thank you, Bhante.
I'm glad you're not.
Thank you.
May you
Thank
live
you.
a long and
Thank
happy
you.
life, Bhante. Be safe. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Organizers.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you for the
Bye.
organizers.
Thank you. Thank you to all.
Thank
Bye.
you all.
Thank you,
Taan Ajaan.
Thank you, Ajaan Geoff.
Obrigado, Taan Ajaan.
Janata, Marcos, aren't you glad you're not friends?